You all, it is a pleasure to be here. So my name is Dr. Chinyere Ogbonna, and I am originally from Middle Tennessee. So, so when I say I'm originally from Middle Tennessee, people usually go, ooh la la, where are you really from? So I go, are you asking where I was born or where I was originally from? If that is the case, then I am originally from Nigeria. And then they go, oh, hence why you have the deep African accent. So I do have a deep African accent, like my students will say. And so today, I want to start my talk by recollecting the fact that when I was growing up, my parents instilled in me the necessity of having a voice and being heard. And so my dad especially encouraged me to have my say and to tell my story and to be heard. And so stories do matter. Stories tell us a little bit about who we are. And when we tell our stories, we can be heard. And when we can be heard, we can be acknowledged. Being heard does not mean that the listener agrees with you. Being heard means that the listener appreciates the fact that you took the risk of sharing your story, and the listener honored you by hearing you and acknowledging your story. So I want to pause and say thank you all so much for staying on to hear my story. So my story today is going to be a modicum of all the stories that I have to tell since I came to America almost 30 years ago as an immigrant. And so, but today I'm going to focus my story on my experiences since I came to Austin Peay as a professor in 2003, which is almost 20 years ago. And so the title of my talk is Recreating My Norm, Reconciling My Educational Experience in Nigeria with Experience as a university professor at the Southern State University. And so one of the things that I will mention is that as an immigrant, you have to do some adjustment. According to the Library of Congress, 3 of the most important issues that immigrants face in America are language barriers, cultural adjustment issues, and prejudice. My talk is gonna touch on cultural barriers and language barriers. So when you come to a place, a new society as an immigrant, there has to be a sort of subtle adjustment. You have to adjust to the new culture or the new norms because that is different from what you grew up with. One can decide to go ahead and shed their norms and embrace in its entirety the new culture, or one can try to find a balance between the two. When we talk about culture, we are talking about the norms, the beliefs, and the social institutions of a particular place. So for instance, I remember the first party I was invited to when I came to America. So the party was at 1 o'clock, and back home in Igbo land, when you are invited to a party, you don't eat the whole day because you expect you're gonna be really well fed at the party. So the party was 1 o'clock. In Igbo land in Nigeria, if you are invited to a party 1 o'clock, you get there 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, there is still food, everybody is still there. So this party was 1 o'clock, I arrived around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and there was no more food, and people were leaving. It was a shocker. That taught me, and it was etched in my mind, that Americans, when they say 1 o'clock for a party, you better be there by 1 o'clock. As opposed to Nigeria, when they invite you to a party at 1 o'clock, you get there at 4 o'clock and the party's just getting started. So though that was one of the things I learned culturally. And of course here, the bride's parents pay for the wedding. Whereas in Nigeria, it is the guy that pays the dowry or bride price. So those are some of the things that you have to learn when you get to a new society. And so you have to take the time to learn about the norms and nuances of the society. For instance, when I first came here, prima facie, when someone says, bless your heart in the South, I used to think it was a good thing, right? Because they're saying, ooh la la, bless your heart. Well, I have now discovered, I paid attention and listened, and I have now discovered that bless your heart is a polite way of actually giving you an insult. It is the prelude to the insult. So like they will say, bless your heart, you can't drive to save your life. Or bless your heart, you can't cook. So it is the prelude to an insult. And that reminds me of something that we say in Nigeria. We can say something like, Jezuike, which literally means go and rest, but it's actually an insult. You are bothering me, get out of my face. So inherent in that is the fact that when you go to a place, you need to take the time and learn about the nuances of the place because it's not self-evident immediately. And so, as I was saying, as an immigrant, you have to reconcile the norms that you grew up with and the norms that are in the place where you have immigrated to. And so I decided to blend my norms, keep portions of my culture that I agree with, and take up some of America's culture. And it is important, and that served me well as a professor, a new professor in 2003 when I came here, to observe the norms of the university that I came into. That is my picture as a 16-year-old second-year student at the medical institution. I specialized in parasitology and entomology, and I got into university when I was 15 years old. And that was actually the outfit I wore for lectures that day. Okay, so when you are here in a new culture, it is important to recognize the fact that you are in a new place and there has to be some adaptation that goes on. And so the adaptation that I utilized when I came to Austin Peay in 2003 is what I'm gonna talk about today. So the three main adaptations that I'm gonna talk about and what I noticed at Austin Peay are, the first one, the power distance. When we are talking about power distance, we are talking about the disparity in authority. So in Nigeria, to say, the professor is like a demigod that cannot be questioned. Okay, the professor saying goes without challenge. When I came to Austin Peay, I was actually shocked to hear students call their professors by name. They'll go, hey, Bill, that assignment you gave us. I could not believe it because that was so different from what I grew up with. But as I've stayed long enough, I have actually grown to appreciate the dialogue and being challenged by my students. And my students take well to it. So I usually in class will say to them, ooh la la, go ahead and challenge me, but make sure that your challenge is based on facts and research, not just mere opinions, because I do not care for just mere opinions that are not based on research and facts. And I have found that my students have taken well to it. And in my criminal justice classes, I also make sure that we have mock trials, and students have autonomy with regards to the mock trials. I choose the case. I allow the attorneys, the prosecuting and defending attorneys, the autonomy to go ahead and choose, fill in the details of the case, and then of course students are members of the jury and what have you. And we've had law enforcement, judges, lawyers, and other faculty members and my students' family members attend the mock trials. And it's a great learning experience, and they love it, and they love the fact that they have autonomy in the process. And I love the fact that they use deductive, critical thinking, reasoning process. And so that was a part of my going ahead and incorporating the norms that I observed in America with my classes, while keeping the academic expectations of the class. So the second one I'm gonna talk about is the tone of voice. Of course, there is nothing more frustrating than not being understood. So I have gotten to the point, sometimes I'm talking to Comcast on the phone, and they're like, can you please repeat what you said? If any of my sons are home from the university, I will hand the phone over to them and say, please explain to them what I'm talking about. So my sons, in essence, act as my interpreters. I remember the other day, I was trying to get a gentleman to come and mow my lawn. I was trying to talk to him, and he said to me, hold on a moment. And I think he handed the phone to a woman that may have been his wife, and he said, talk to her because I don't understand what she's saying. Okay, so she came on the phone, and I was explaining to her what I needed done. So when I first came here, I used to speak in a very low tone like this, and people will not understand me, and they will tell me to repeat myself. So as a means of adaptation, my tone has increased. I now speak in a loud voice. People tell me I have a loud voice. You know, my students say they appreciate it because they can understand me better when I speak loudly. I believe it makes the process of understanding my accent easier when I speak loudly. Nonetheless, my students also tell me that, ooh la la, when you come to my class, it takes a period of 2 or 3 weeks before they can begin to get the nuances of my accent. And so when I have face-to-face lectures, I do have my marker in hand to be able to write all the words that my students do not understand. So I have acquired a louder manner of speaking. And so when I travel back home to Africa, they are shocked. And I'm not gonna repeat what they say about my tone of voice. And in America, some people say, ooh la la, I don't like her tone, it's too loud. But that was part of my adaptation to make sure that the process works for my students. Otherwise, I will be definitely repeating myself all the time. And the last one that I want to talk about is attire. So when you are at the university back home in Nigeria, you dress up. It's like you totally dress up. It's like you're going for a formal business meeting. And then if you are inclined to wear African attire, you wear the African attire with the echafo and so on and so forth. So like I showed you all the picture of me as a student when I was 16 years old, that outfit was exactly what I wore for lectures that day. The first time I walked into class, my students, some of my students were wearing flip-flops and shorts. It was an eye-opening moment for me. I have now gotten used to the idea of flip-flops and shorts. But my students, they usually say, ooh la la, Dr. Magruder, how come we've never seen you wearing a t-shirt? And I go, I don't own any t-shirts. And they're shocked because they can't understand how you can live in America without owning t-shirts. And so I try to explain to them, and I try, for lack of a better word, to assimilate with their ways of dressing. For the longest time, I did not have jean pants, okay? And so I have now acquired some jean brands that I dress up with jackets, like I might pair with a designer, a Donna Karan jacket to lecture or something like that, to make my students feel a little bit more comfortable, because they always ask me, ooh la la, why is it that you're always so dressed up? And so that is part of the cultural adaptation that you have to engage in order to assimilate to a society. My students still tell me that I dress differently. And some of my African attire has been described as costume. And so I tend not to wear my African attire as much as I used to when I first came here. And so I remember one time there was a note put under my office door, and the note said, why don't you dress more American? And so it was not signed. And so I do not nowadays usually wear American outfits, not because I don't want to, but because I think I have assimilated enough to go ahead and embrace American dressing to some extent, And so the point is, if you are in a new culture or new environment or new society, it is important to have a broad perspective and look at things from the other's views. And then pay attention, listen, and then maybe you can begin to pick up some parts of that culture that you can embrace. And that is what I think I have managed to do since I've been here since 2003. And so in conclusion, it is challenging to be an immigrant in another country. You cannot imagine how frustrating it is not to be understood and not to understand Americans. I tell my students that I think Americans have an accent. I do not understand the words to musical lyrics. So sometimes when I'm singing a song, my children will go, Mom, stop singing, you're butchering it. Please stop singing, okay? So I'm not gonna even try to explain some of the songs that they've said I've butchered. And when I go to the movies nowadays, I don't like it because when I watch movies at home, I always use subtitles. Till today, I cannot watch a movie without subtitles because I will lose some of the movie sentences. So I need to have my subtitles. So it is important for people to understand that it is quite a journey and quite challenging to immigrate to a new country. But I believe that if you have an open mind and open perspective, it can be done while challenging. It can be very, very satisfying. And that's my talk for today. Thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure.